I'd like to introduce Stacy as our host tonight for the panel this evening.
And it's an absolute pleasure, Melissa. I do want to call out that one of our panelists is going to be here in just a moment, had some personal obligations, but we'll we'll let it slide, right? With that, I'd love to have you get to know some of our panelists today. And I want to set the preface here that this is a collaborative event. We actively encourage you to ask questions, raise a hand, throw it in the chat, because this is an opportunity to see people and talk to people who already are what you want to be, or a pathway you're maybe just even thinking about, or just, I want to learn more about this. So we are so privileged to have these women here today that are experienced technologists that all have totally different backgrounds and totally different specializations. And you know, I couldn't be more proud of the women that we are able to bring to y'all today. So with that, I'd love to start with Angela Darrington. Angela is a principal engineer at Dropbox with 20 plus years of engineering experience. She is committed to driving product trust through customer-centered decision-making, product excellence, and sustainable engineering. Her role at Dropbox gives her the opportunity to work with teams across the products and technical stack. However, her specific areas of focus are mobile and web product experiences. As a technical leader, she takes the most joy from helping teams navigate sticky, tricky trade-off decisions and creating space for colleagues to uplift their ideas, collaborate, and bring those ideas to fruition. And on a personal note, Angela lives in Seattle, Washington with her two wonderful children, one heading off to high school in the fall, my goodness, two cats, and a very sweet dog. In her free time, she enjoys meandering through farmers markets, enjoying nature, and a good laugh with family and friends. All right, and I see one of the is right here. And that would be Jordan McAdoo. I keep adding the extra word, and I've known you for so long, and I keep messing it up. I'm so sorry. But Jordan received a degree in animation and quickly became interested in software engineering and design. She found her passion there, taught herself how to write code, along with a lot of support from her peers, and ultimately fell in love with iOS app development using Swift. She founded the Springfield Women in Technology, a group to help support the community of women and gender minorities working or interested in tech in her community, as well as to encourage young girls to consider a future in the tech world. And finally, Maria. Maria is a trailblazing women's leadership expert, electrifying audiences with her dynamic presentations and innovative strategies. Her unique approach to leadership challenges audiences to hone their focus and prioritize what truly matters in both their professional and personal lives. Her practical strategies are not just inspiring, they're also easy to remember and apply, helping people make real changes that last. Wow, that's quite the list, y'all. So I wanted to kind of start out with something pretty little softball, right? Can you give us just a little bit of your history and where you are in your journey? Do you know where you want to go? Are you are you happy with where you're at? You know, all those kinds of things. And I loved hearing some of the backstories with how y'all ended up in technology or technical fields.
I'm happy to start. Yeah, I've been doing this for a while, as you mentioned in my intro. And so my background's always been in engineering. I started in chemical engineering of all things and working in the lab and that sort. But I ended up having to take a required course called Fortran 77, if anyone has heard of such an archaic language, and just loved it. Like, it was like a kind of joy that I hadn't been experiencing in my other classes, and like just really rocked it and felt a sense of accomplishment. And so I remember talking to my advisor at the time in the lab, saying like, hey, like I only have one more year left in chemical engineering. Like, I'll just finish that up. I'll go back to school for computer science and like figure it out. And he's like, oh, no. Like, he's now this very mature 40-year-old, you know, someone who I thought was very wise and old at the time. And now I'm that person. But like, and he's like, no, just change your major now. And do what you love, and, you know, take that little bit of extra time to explore this computer science degree program, and which is what I did. And I'm so grateful to him for having like set me on that path. So my career, I started out in writing chemistry software, which, you know, kind of made sense with my background, and stayed in kind of engineering and sciences for the first decade of my career, building mostly desktop apps. And then the Great Recession happened about 14 years ago, because the same age as my daughter, and needed to do a quick like reset on my career due to some massive layoffs at Boeing, and ended up in this, you know, large consumer-based company, which was Scottrade. It was a fintech company at the time, and really learned a joy of building apps for these huge consumer bases, and what that takes. During that time, mobile came on the scene. And so I was very, very lucky, and I got to transition from desktop over to mobile during my time there, and help build the first native mobile apps for that company, and then just kind of stayed in that realm. And that's how Stacy and I got to know each other, is the Android professionals out in the world. And there's a really awesome group of women that really support each other in that community. And so kept building Android apps for different companies, and ended up at Dropbox, and continued to grow from there. And so at this point in my career, I've transitioned off of working on mobile directly, and then being driver overall product org.
I can go next. So I started out as an electrical engineer, got my degree in electrical. Took after, I'll say, a little bit of my father. He was an electrician. I had two older brothers. And when my father went on weekend jobs, my brothers had no interest in what he was doing, but I was the one that wanted to hold the flashlight in any electrical panel he was getting into. And I was the one, other than the boys, to follow in the footsteps. But I will say that having two older brothers set the stage for me, because entering into the world of engineering, certainly back in the day, although I did have a lot of college mates that were also women in engineering, once I got into the workforce, I did find that I was largely the only woman in the room. But it was natural, a very natural environment for me, and did eventually fall in love with automation. So did a lot of very early stages of PLCs and HMIs in manufacturing. That was mostly my realm. Absolutely did love it. It made my heart sing on the inside when I was doing the work, but on the outside and all of the other tricky parts that come along with the environment and relationships, and trying to figure out like why do I have more experience and I'm more capable, but I'm not getting paid as much as my male counterparts? Those were the things that were the biggest challenges, I'll say. But when I was young, I was just happy to be able to pay the rent, buy my own car. My first job, I was making more money than both of my parents. So it was a natural place for me to just kind of exist, I'll say, because that was an early success. But after decades, still being the only woman in the room, I really felt like, my girlfriends were right behind me. And as long as I was showing up for work, that I was actually changing the world, until I came across the TED Talk 20 years in, which is about 10 years ago, that said all the women are like leaving. And I thought, oh no, what is going on here? Although that wasn't the end of the road. That was a time, though, that did get me into the coaching world, because I was like, there has to be another element to this whole story and this world we live in. I wanted to do another level of problem solving and project management, if you will, on my outside of work life. And that paid off in pretty big dividends. And it was interesting to see the relationships and the ties there. So I appreciate your question there, Stacy, whenever you said, where are we now and where are we going? Because I'm absolutely living my best life, absolutely in my joy, but I'm not sure where I can and will go next. So it's going to be fun.
That's
Well,
amazing.
Yeah.
And I would love to hear from Jordan.
Yeah, sorry, I was a little bit late, by the way. I got the days completely wrong, but happy to be here. I'd say I have more of a non-traditional background. As Stacy mentioned in my intro, I went to school and graduated with a degree in animation and like film editing. And after school, I did some like contract work with that, and I quickly realized that while I loved doing it for myself, I did not like doing that for paid work and being told like what I had to do in my animation. So for a while, I was just working at local bars as a server and bartender. I think really when I got pregnant with my first child is what got me in gear. And so at that time, I took a job at a help desk to have something a little bit more stable. And quickly realized I also didn't like answering phones. So I found any way to shift out of that, which at that position was moving into QA, was like an easy transition. So moved there. It was a like really waterfall sort of business. So I had always had an interest in programming specifically, back in like Zynga, MySpace days, and messing around with the code on those sites. And so I just started to teach myself then. And once I switched jobs and worked at a place that used agile methodologies, I was able to be embedded on a team with developers. And so every day I would get like more hands-on with writing code. I got really into writing test automation. And then I was like, well, this is the part of my job I like the most. So why don't I just switch into this? And I was really fortunate that I got to do an internal apprenticeship there, and I moved into a developer role. I also started doing iOS because it was like a contracting company. So your tech stack just really depended on your team, which was cool for a while. But then I really liked doing mobile development, and I wanted more of like an investment in the thing I was working on, not just like develop it and then hand it off and move on to something else. So switched from there, and I worked at Stitch Fix for a while. And this year I moved over to working at Square. As far as what's next, I don't know. I don't really have plans to leave iOS development. When I was searching for a job, my requirements were like something fully remote and something doing iOS. So that's where I am for now. And I still like writing apps. I'd love to write something like independently once my kids stop being so needy. So we'll see when that happens.
It's amazing to hear everyone's backstory a little bit more in depth, and just how we all kind of found a different way forward. And I say we too, because I kind of qualify in this group in particular. But in your mind, what is and this is what it's kind of called, right? A staff plus engineer. So to give all of y'all a little bit of context, just like any other position, levels are all over the place. Names can be all over the place. At one place, staff is like equivalent to somebody's VP. At other places, it's equivalent to just a very a leader a lead senior engineer, right? So like scale and scope, but what do you think it is that really sets a staff plus apart? And what is a staff plus engineer, especially in the context of kind of what is expected of a more just senior engineer?
I'm happy to go.
Yeah.
I'll get start this time. Yeah, I think kind of the second definition maybe is what my personal understanding for staff has been, where it's more of like at least starting out as more like of a lead senior engineer. And I think that's kind of where I fall to. And so I think at that point in your career, it's like you're still writing code, but writing less code sometimes, and moving more into like a higher level view of projects. And so you might be dealing more with architecture or just like project leadership and making sure things are getting done. Yeah, so I mean, I think personally for me, that's like what I take staff to be.
I'd have to ditto the part on leadership. So as a staff engineer, so you kind of know the basics, and you're using best practices, so that is more of a natural part of the daily grind in every way, whether it's dealing with technical problems or maybe even people problems. And then it's exemplifying having a very calm and resilient methodology to your leadership style, bringing that to the forefront and allowing the layers of problem solving to trickle down from the things that you do. So it's not just understanding that you're working on one problem with one person, but you understand that by working on that one problem with that one person, it's going to have the butterfly effect and trickle down into every aspect of not only the organization, but the impact that the organization has on the entire world.
Yeah, I would. It's interesting. This is something I live on a pretty regular basis as a principal engineer. There's 2 principal engineers for my org of 500 at Dropbox, and we have maybe 20, 30 staff engineers inside of that org. And like, what makes a staff engineer? And I know I saw Stacy's questions about archetypes and that sort of thing as well, which we talk a lot about at Dropbox. But what really makes a staff engineer to me, in my mind, is the technical decision making and recognizing like systemic challenges to the organization, to their area of ownership, and proposing solutions to that so that they can unlock innovation, unlock efficiency, whatever it is that's going on for that particular part of the organization. A lot of times the staff engineer is also that like trusted coach and mentor to the engineers around them. And that's a big part of that role, and something that I've really learned to enjoy and find as the primary part of my job is to really be there for the engineers around me, be a sounding board, amplify their message if they're not sure, like, I have this great idea, I'm not sure who to put it in front of, or I have this great idea, I'm not sure how to frame it, so that others can really like grok what it is that I'm trying to propose to the organization. so yeah, it's that servant leader, it's that problem solver. Those are the kinds of aspects that I see at the staff engineer and plus levels.
It's so interesting how perspectives kind of change and grow. And as part of that growth, right? What are some responsibilities that a staff plus engineer has, and how do they change as you grow? How have you seen your growth in that kind of line, that growth, that technical track?
A lot more maker time involves writing docs than writing code. I did find it slightly ironic. I was like, women who code, huh, that's novel. But no, seriously, it is a lot more like direction setting for teams. It's a lot more of like supporting the leaders around you. So whether it's the product leaders or your engineering management chain on, how do we do this cool thing that we think is going to be beneficial to the company? How do we actually achieve that? That's a lot of the responsibility of staff engineer plus, as well as I would say career mentorship is a critical portion, at least at Dropbox. As part of our core responsibilities is mentorship of the engineers around us to help them level up in their career, and then represent them when we go through what's called calibrations at Dropbox, but essentially like the performance review cycles where we consider like who's going up for promotion, that sort of thing. A big part of our role is also to be able to really understand what engineers are doing around us so that we can represent them from a technical point of view and advocate for them, especially for me, it's those individuals who are doing the non-glamorous engineering work that sometimes doesn't get the splashy headlines, and to be able to say like, wow, like the work they did really accelerated the business in ways that maybe are quiet but very impactful. And that's a part of my role, at least, that I take very seriously.
Yeah, I'll chime in with some of the nicer aspects, so they're usually booking the Christmas parties and the summer fun outings and organizing retreats. They're definitely doing a lot more interviewing and really building the skill set and the larger body of the company, intentionally. And they're actually also planning and participating in leadership, their own personal leadership development. So it's interesting, once you get to a certain level that that's kind of expected as part of the job. So it's kind of some of the finer perks of the role.
Yeah, I think it's kind of funny too, how it can really differ based on the size of the company you're at and then the size of the team you join. Like I have joined a team that is pretty small, and the other iOS person on my team just left. So I'm basically doing all of it right now, like all the feature planning, estimation, like actual development, etc. So I think that part of it too is just like being able to put on different hats and like act sort of in these different roles as you're needed at that time.
I think one thing that so I just hopped into a new job, so I can sew this again. But I've been here for like 3.5 weeks, and I have to lay a ton of foundation. And I haven't code hard in a while. And I'm like, I looked and I'm like, okay, I'm gonna be probably at about 10,000, over 10,000 lines of code written in the last like 3 weeks. And I'm like, shoot, I still have to get this dependency other thing done too, and this thing too, and like and could do all this like major like heavy lifting, right? So I think it's interesting how the responsibility changes while you're still also talking to the VP, like managing managing expectations and doing all this nurturing work and sitting with the back end teams for like 2 or 3 hours a week, trying to be like, no, we need to go with this. And why aren't these two things connecting and providing, like, at least in my case, I'm always tapping into other skill sets. I feel like, do y'all feel like that's part of like what you're jumping into or growing into is like, oh yeah, no, the reason why this is taking so long on the server is because of like this function that's connecting over to this service and getting this return and it's not synchronized or whatever. I don't know.
Yeah, you touched on something that I didn't add to it, but yeah, I think 50% of my job is that like cross org communication and kind of like translation layer between the different aspects of the org, because you know, I find like product teams are just running in a different mental model than was like deep infra teams who are like, we are laying the foundation. And this is kind of like, this is very important, and it is very important, but we don't speak the same language. Even in engineering, it doesn't always speak the same language. And to be able to translate that, and then to be able to translate that to, you know, like product leaders, for example, who might be curious about like, why is such and such taking so long? You're like, why is this you know, a long running process, and be able to translate to those to folks who maybe are even farther removed from the technical stack.
That's really interesting. So I know I touched on this a little bit, and I hope that some of this is also just coming in through intrinsically in terms of some of the scale and scope that we've been talking about. But what has kind of staff and staff plus generally, you know, been equivalent to in terms of like the managerial side in organizations that you've been a part of? Has it been like staff is you know, junior manager, or staff is this, or like what level of variance have you seen, and how do you also determine what is the rightest path for you, or if you're ready for that next step within your organizations? Overall, not talking about a specific company, just overall.
Yeah,
Yeah, I could. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I think like similar to saying that staff is sort of like a lead senior, I've seen the same thing at management. Matching like a more senior manager would be like the equivalent of a staff engineer. And from my experience, it's been like you can go through once you hit senior engineer and then do the management track, or stay on IC and like move up into staff and maybe principal. I do find it confusing, like with all of the different names and what they mean at different companies. The company I joined now uses like the numerical system of levels, and I find that a lot easier to follow than like calling it staff or lead or principal.
I would
Yeah, I
say,
definitely. Okay.
go ahead.
Yeah, just like touching on the levels versus the names, like I've definitely seen that once a company kind of, it seems like when companies place the label staff, even if they use a level, like a numbering system, like I know Dropbox uses a numbering system, Google does, Square does, you know, lots of companies use this leveling numbering system. It seems to indicate kind of like a transition in the role, like a transition to a more solid leadership expectation, and more of a clear partnership than with senior management, versus maybe the other leveling is you're doing awesome and you're a very like high quality senior engineer, but there's just like a little something there, you know, that changes. So our leveling at Dropbox is a staff engineer is most equivalent to like a manager of managers. And so you usually have like oversight over several teams in kind of what they're working on, and can help drive that technical vision there. And then you're doing a lot of the collaboration at that kind of like same level with whoever your dependent teams or who your customer teams are, for example. And then principal engineer is more equivalent to like a director level. So somebody that would oversee an entire org. We have one more level. We have a senior principal engineer. We just have one. And so he's more or less equivalent to like the VP level.
Yeah, I find this is very interesting because you did mention earlier, it does have a lot to do with how big the company is. And I think this is important to kind of pay attention in your own career, because when most of my career working with a small company, there really wasn't a lot of levels. So it can really easily become mundane and difficult to challenge yourself and feel a level of reward that's commensurate with your growing capabilities. Because even if you're, grinding it out and maybe you're not changing levels over, long periods of time, which may seem, that doesn't mean you're not advancing. So I'd highly recommend you take that into your own hands and you start counting in some realm and setting goals for yourself where you understand that you are accelerating and climbing some level of ladder. So because in a small company, you may work there for like 10, 15 years and never have the opportunity to go that one step to director. But by golly, that doesn't mean that you are not growing into that and then fully capable of that in whatever way that that transpires for you. So very, very awesome question. And that can come out in many different ways. Yeah, highly encourage you, definitely. Yeah, I like to talk, in my leadership realm, as a coach, that you have to have unstoppable goals. Have a career one and a personal one. And the two will, complement each other and help you grow in both sides. But definitely don't leave it up to your boss to define what your next role is going to be or how long that's going to take. It can be horribly disappointing. I've talked to too many people over 15 years that waited 15 years for promotion and then never got it. And things went off the rails. But in the meantime, if you have one unstoppable goal, you are daily working out the SMART goals and you are absolutely growing even whenever it doesn't feel like it. So make sure you have someone in your court that's reflecting that too, because you are going to be your worst critic and you're not going to take credit for the advancement that is happening. So absolutely, use these types of communities, use some kind of sisterhood, I never had a lot of friends that even understood what I did, so I couldn't even talk about it with anybody, but grab somebody. I mean, the world has changed and there's tons of us out there right now. So take your careers into your own hands.
That is probably the best advice that you're going to get today. I don't know. We have a longer panel left, but I also just go ahead and say and we did have a session on career coaches and executive coaches as part of this series specifically for that. If you haven't had an opportunity to watch that, please do. Because it also helps you realize the things that are keeping you stuck in the level that you're at, whether or not you're at the right organization or you've just gotten comfortable. A bunch of other things about intangibles. If you are getting a lot of reasons like butt in chair time for why you're not being promoted this cycle, they went through a bunch of different things to tell you before that is. But at the other point in time, there's a certain amount of realization that staff plus engineers and that level of promotion being equivalent to management is it is as much about the need for people at that level as it is your ability to fulfill that need. So, and whether or not they recognize it or they think that, that you'll just continue doing the work, which can definitely also happen. So, have people in your corner to make sure that that's going forward. Wow. Such a great reply. Thank you very much, Maria. So, you know, again, this isn't something that's been altogether super well defined. I feel like staff plus engineering is really something that we saw come into more of a fruition, especially in the last, I would say 7 years, not even a full 10, in terms of being able to recognize and retain talent, as really the needs of software engineering are significantly different than they were 10, 15, 20 years ago. So how'd you discover this path? Did you have somebody in your corner rooting you? Did you go, oh yeah, this is what I want, and you're going to give it to me? You know, tell us a little bit about how you got there.
Yeah, I'll add in my comments. Like, Maria talked a bit about, like, I can't remember exactly the words, but essentially, you know, being passion driven. I would say that my path was to always have, I always just naturally had a goal in mind, and I went after it. I recently was told I'm a risk taker, and I didn't completely like recognize that in myself, that it was like, we have a problem, we have to fix it, like, let's just do it. And like, could be fairly single-minded at times about this, for good and, you know, for better or for worse. And that was really, I think, what put me on this path to becoming a staff engineer. To be frank, though, I had never heard of this role before I joined Dropbox. I came from the Midwest. I lived in St. Louis. We did not have this concept there. We had this concept of like architects, and there's like an architecture group, and that was in my mind, like, this is what you wanted to do to get to the next level. And so when I interviewed at Dropbox, they leveled me there, which was really, I was really grateful for, and it's been a really interesting ride to take on this different kind of position than what I would have done, you know, I was originally thinking I would be doing. And so some of it is just, you know, like, trust your instincts. And if you see a through line in solving a problem, even if other folks maybe are not quite there yet, you know, find your allies, you know, try different methods for explaining your idea and advocate for it as best as you can. And that's my strongest recommendation, you know, and you can start smaller, and then your scope grows as your experience grows and that sort of thing. So like, my scope, I knew, grew when I was working at Scottrade. You know, I was the technical lead for the desktop app, and then I was technical lead for the first mobile apps. And I just had to be hyper focused and take on a lot of challenges, but it was at that level, and then just kept growing from there. And so I don't know, that would be my advice. Be a risk taker, trust yourself. Yeah.
Yeah, and I would add too, on the times, even I'll say at the end of the rope, right? When things didn't seem like they were going great, and you know, I was in survival mode, right? I had a motto that kind of kept me grounded, if you will. And I always thought the logic never lies, right? And even in all the turbulence and all the hard days, and when I was, you know, missing out on certain things, even that lowest point, I always had a sense, and this is so true for, I guarantee all of you, is that even on your worst day, you are better than 80% of any other human being out there. Okay. So ride the waves, even at your lowest point, have a grounding point, and be fine with that, knowing that, you know, the scale always goes up, you know, the trend will come up again, and you'll get through it for sure.
Yeah, I think kind of on that same page, like you mentioned, it's important to have these long-term goals that you're working towards. I've also found, like, some days you're just going to live in the moment and like look at what's next on the next day. And I've also had moments where I've like completely changed what my goal looks like and what I'm working towards. And so I just think like having that adaptability has led me where I am today. I knew like this kind of role existed, but honestly, where I was back like 5+ years ago, I didn't have enough perspective on what the different options looked like to really know that's what I wanted to go into. So as I like went up into more senior engineering levels, I got a better idea of what, you know, like a staff engineer versus management would look like. And so I think just like being willing to change and reflect on like whatever you learn is really important in that career path too.
Yeah, Jordan touched on something that I think is so key as well on this like journey to staff is that flexibility and knowing where you can make impact, even if it's outside of your immediate area. I think that's a lot of times what I'll see with folks who are aspiring to staff is they're saying like, oh, this thing that's adjacent or I'm dependent on is not working as well as it could, or we could be more innovative if we did blah, 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 right? And it's those individuals that see that that opportunity and then advocate for it and find that sponsorship for it and things along those lines, that is oftentimes that path to staff. And I know like even my path to principal was that like I stepped away from mobile because we had a challenge with our analytics pipeline. And I was like, hey, I think we can solve this. Like, and just, you know, hopes and dreams and some passion and pull the right folks together and then to do what it takes. And that was my through line to principal was stepping away from mobile, which was my comfort zone. I was like, you know, this is my security blanket zone. To something that was very, very different for me and just feeling confidence that we can get there if we all work together.
Yeah, I think being willing to like take that initiative and notice when there's a gap or an opportunity is crucial for sure.
I call it the levels of self-ownership and perspective. So as soon as somebody kind of makes that jump, like the biggest distinguishing feature for me between somebody who's a senior engineer and a staff engineer is a product level mindset and focus. And then the next step up to like senior staff, and at some places they call that principal and other things, but like kind of the next step is I don't just own my product. I own everything that touches my product. That is all my responsibility because at the end of the day, nobody's going to go, oh, well, Jim just put together this thing really poorly and they're especially from the mobile app development side, right? If the homepage takes 4 or 5 seconds to load, what does a user say? The app is really slow. Well, those 4 or 5 seconds are on a back-end piece that that person, that organization has no control over. Well, guess I'm digging into that. That kind of mindset, I think, is what changes the scale and scope, and then the next level up, and you're kind of burgeoning in this space where you're becoming a little bit of the info person for the executive leadership when you're getting tapped, right? And then that next level, you are working at an executive level, right? So if we are in those places, and that that executive equivalent, right, really is a totally different perspective, and there's totally different skill sets required at each jump. And I think they're pretty significant, and they're not what people necessarily think. So with that, are you all familiar with the staff engineer archetypes? Dun, dun, dun.
I wasn't, but you did send a link, so I read the page. So now I am.
I didn't read that doc, Stacy, but hopefully we're close enough aligned with the ones we use internally to your concept archetype.
I'm talking about the staffeng.com staff archetypes, which I imagine the Dropbox basically extended it because I made my own as well. So and I think that that's really interesting that like versus kind of a more traditional management standpoint, there are some options. So to give everyone a little bit of context, has anybody here heard of the staff archetypes? Present? No. Okay. So let me give you a little overview. So the first one is the tech lead. The tech lead guides the approach and execution of a particular team. They partner closely with a single manager or a set of partners focused in a specific area. Some companies also have a tech lead manager role or a tech lead archetype or directly a tech lead role, but that exists on the engineering management ladder. I can also say I've done this job before, but over more than one team as well, but that's the tech lead. Now, next is the architect. And I think this falls directly into one of Charissa Thomas's questions about architecture versus staff engineering that she posted as Pat's. Now, the architect is responsible for direction, quality, and approach within a critical area. They combine in-depth knowledge of technical constraints, user needs, and organizational level leadership. The solver digs deep into arbitrary complex problems and finds an appropriate path forward. Some focus on a given area for long periods, others bounce from hotspot to hotspot as guided by organizational leadership. And then there's the one they call the right hand, or I think of like the Game of Thrones, the hand, right? You're the COO, the executor of the things, right? And you really extend an executive's attention, borrowing for their scope and authority to operate particularly complex organizations. They provide additional leadership bandwidth to leaders of large-scale organizations. Now, so first off, do our panelists think that any of these are kind of valid, or are you like hogwash?
Well, I think I mentioned we use these internally, so I believe in them. I would go for it.
Yeah, I was going to say, as I was reading through it, a lot of it resonated with me. I think in this, it also talks about how it can vary at the size and stage of the company and what actually exists within those archetypes. So I think just the nature of the companies I've worked at, I haven't seen some of them, but I thought it was really interesting to see these different roles like better defined in that way.
Yeah, it feels like they're just kind of they resonate based on either a role or a task that, you know, may be performed.
So
yeah, what we've discussed internally is that most staff engineers, especially principal engineers, don't adhere to any one archetype. Like it depends on the need of the organization, is what you do. And a lot of times I feel like the staff engineers are the Swiss Army knives of the organization. They just kind of like do what needs to get done. Whatever that is, whatever that archetype is.
So do you feel like there's a particular one that resonates with you individually, or even just with you right now, or that you've been in the past? Like how has that changed for you too?
Yeah, for me, I tend to be the architect or right-hand person along the lines. And I would see that internally, those are usually promotions into staff, and principal are more that like architect or right-hand sort of positions. But what we found internally is that you're the architect and you design the thing and you're like, oh, we should do the thing, and you sponsor it and you get an advocate for it, such. And then you get to be the tech lead for the thing. And then you're tech lead for a while and get that, rolling in a good rhythm, and usually then start transitioning that off to other engineers to drive that going forward. Solvers are the unique one. I would say solvers tend to stay in the solver lane more frequently than like architects, tech leads, right hand people. I feel like those three archetypes kind of like cycle around. Solvers, at least the solvers at Dropbox, they really like living in their solver point of view, and I really appreciate them doing that, because they're the ones who are like, system isn't doing the right thing, like let me deep dive and figure it out. And they're the one that's always just like unblocking, making sure everything's functioning in a really optimal way. But I'm also the right hand, so I'm the tech lead to my VP.
Would you like a pin? You need a pin?
I know, I do all the things. I do need a pin. I'm going to talk to him about that. You'd enjoy it.
You have a feminazi pin. You should wear it. Be like, this is my hand pin.
I do, yeah.
Maria or Jordan, any of those resonate with you particularly, or?
Yeah, I'd say in the manufacturing realm, for a large company where you have maybe central engineering and plant engineering, definitely the solvers are going to be the ones that don't want anything to do with central engineering and more the corporate world. They're going to be the people that, it's a double-edged sword, because they don't like, there's an aversion to the politics maybe, and the more corporate feel. They would rather be, solving the problems. But then they're also going to be the people that are getting calls in the middle of the night and working the 12-hour days. So, there's always a catch-22 there. But they're where the rubber hits the road. And then we heard basically the tech leads and the right hands, and the architects are going to be more in the corporate world, depending on what you like.
Yeah, I think my whole time basically as like this level has been pretty much spot on the tech lead role. But I really like that. I think it's nice because I have a lot of like ownership over our area, but also cross-functional collaboration with teams. And I maybe like at my last role, a little bit of the architect role as well. I think where I am right now, it's probably going to be harder to accomplish something like that, at least on a grander scale. And yeah, there's a lot of levels where I'd say like the right hand to get there at my company. But yeah, I like the tech lead role. And I think it mentioned in here too, like that's pretty widespread, like majority of staff probably identify with that. So I see that as like the more traditional, maybe alongside with architect of a staff engineer.
I think it's interesting. And y'all have kind of all said like the solvers tend to just be solvers. Personally, I identify as a mix of the architect and the solver, and I call it the fixer. And it's really just motivated by disappointment. Because like you're like, okay, I need to do the thing, and then you dying and like going, this doesn't look right, and then you're like, this really doesn't, oh shoot. Guess I'm learning this and fixing this problem. And then but always in the context of whatever major thing you're trying to accomplish within the product scope and plan, and making sure all the alignment's good. A lot of the things that I feel like a lot of the solvers don't necessarily do, they're just like, just let me sit with the problem and do the problem. And I'm like, okay, this is a real problem. Do you want me working on this or do you not?
Yeah, I think that's where it gets tricky with that role, is like you have to sometimes have somebody dedicated to diving into these problems who aren't like bound by sprint planning and project timelines. So it's like, it's an important role to have, but sometimes it needs to be removed from the person who's acting like as a tech lead on something.
I think a while ago, Jordan and I worked at the same company, and I think she got a one of these oh no presentations where you're like going, oh my goodness, really? And then I was like, do you want me to fix it at the end? And that was a whole other discussion. But you know, it's just one of these things where like I think it's different. I've been these personally and reflecting also with Angela and Maria, definitely been all of these at various points. And I feel like the hand one though gets a little bit difficult because sometimes you are and sometimes you aren't.
Yeah, the hand is an interesting one, and it also very much depends on like how your management works. You know, like I've been lucky enough that the VPs of my last two VPs have really enjoyed having kind of a technical right hand that is the one going out to engineering and getting the you know, the scoop on the streets and things like that. That's not always the case, but I enjoy that portion of my role as well. I think Jordan said something interesting, which is that a lot of times you meet that person that's sitting outside of the sprint planning process. And I know, at least in our organization, a lot of times staff engineers sit outside of the sprint planning process. And so they're oftentimes that first line of defense, more or less, of like, something looks weird. Like, can you look into why this looks weird? Like, and then they do the weirdness and then figure out like what, like to Stacy's point, like, okay, found the weirdness. Should we prioritize fixing the weirdness? And then it starts rolling back into sprint planning. But yeah, they're the glue, I feel like, in between all of these different things.
And it's like this hard thing to track. So it's always like, well, I already got more than a sprint's worth of points done, and I've got like 2 or 3 days. Let's solve some problems and and build some systems. Let's go.
Yeah, exactly.
I literally did that today. I was like, I don't want to write documents and do training. I got 2 hours. Let's solve some problems.
Love it.
So based off of that, we've come into a little bit of like where the leadership portion comes into play, but also how are you able to differentiate yourself from your peers? And I know we talked about the staff archetypes, but I think it's so important to recognize that staff plus engineering does not mean you are no longer a manager. It's just that you're a manager of different things. And, you know, we talked about how the solver just kind of like goes, and they might be like just an absolute technical monster. There's a team I was like going, I'm not even going to interview for this job because 3 of these people are look at their GitHub profile. They code on Sundays. I'm not going to be able to do. They've been doing it every Sunday for the last 10 years. I'm not these people. Like I have a time limit. But you know, all of those kinds of things can play into it as well. Are you more product focused? How do you drive organizational value? How do you drive organizational growth? What does it even look like week to week? And I don't want to say day to day because I know it's totally different, but week to week.
Yeah, I think something we discussed earlier comes up again here, which is like recognizing where there are gaps and leaning into your strengths. So like a recent example for me is that I come back from a background of testing and QA. And so it's more apparent to me, I think, when those, like when test suites could be improved or like there's tests lacking. And So I like reached out to the team, helping with the infrastructure for that, talked to my manager and some other teams, co-bases I was working in, and like took that opportunity to try to make things better. And I think just like, I guess, again, to summarize, leaning into the strengths that you have and filling in those gaps helps you stand out from your peers.
Oh, absolutely. So well stated, Jordan, because, I heard you say that you reached out. So this was something that I didn't understand, and I didn't have mentorship, and I didn't have guidance most of my career. But when you talk about differentiating yourself, I'm naturally the only woman in the room. So just saying yes to that for myself is a huge differentiator. And I never embraced that. I always, tried to blend in with the others and not differentiate. So once I figured that out, it was like, oh, I get it. I like to follow up with my vendors. I like to talk about my quotes. And that's a differentiator because my peers don't do that. They can get, in the box and less on the soft skills and less on, I'll say, the empathy and the compassion. And our world is missing those qualities so badly. And I think that is the differentiator that women bring to the table. And we just need it so badly. So differentiating doesn't even have to be difficult. It's just bringing your own grace to the work that you do and owning it completely. So just, I struggle with that, and I had to learn, I had to fight my way out of that just to figure out like, oh my gosh, just having a smile and coming in, this way is my differentiator. Because it's really necessary. And even though it's an intangible, I'm telling you what, we need it badly.
Differentiation through validation.
Yeah, Ria's on point. Like I would say, the differentiator, and this came up just this week with my peer principal engineer is that ability to bring people back to the table. Oftentimes we can get into situations where the different parties are just not seeing each other's point of view. And maybe that the communication is broken down at this point. Leaning into those communication skills, leaning into the relationships that you've built can really go such a long way in unlocking impact for your company. And for me, it's always like, I suppose my differentiator is I'm always about impact. Like, what can I do to solve the problem? Is it the most impactful problem? Like, if it's not, like, move to the side, and then, that's really my focus. And then somewhere in my career, similar to what Maria was saying, I started recognizing that having this network of relationships across the spectrum. So while I send product, I like to say I'm like bleeding edge product. I like UX. I like usability. I like building pretty UI. Like that's very much where I like to sit. But in order to do that, I need to have tight relationships with product and with design in order to actually have content that works effectively. I need to have relationships with my platform peers, my infrastructure peers, and things like that. And so building all those relationships over the years has gone such a long way to be able to walk into these meetings where, some trusted colleagues is like, hey, Angela, like something's going sideways, can you please join this meeting? And being that person that can come in and say like, okay, let's hear everyone's constraints, let's hear the trade-offs, where is the blockage in this conversation, and bringing everyone back to the table and finding those win-win situations, which usually exist, or at least like a win neutral is also acceptable. But lean into those strengths. And I really can't emphasize enough, like, use your network, build a network at the company you're working at, get to know folks that are outside of your immediate org or your discipline, because those relationships can go a long way to being able to find find where that impact is, right? Like being able to identify that adjacent project that can really unlock impact for your company and be a great a career lever for yourself.
Yeah. And I think kind of on that same note, like making sure that you're being your own cheerleader, because people are often not going to do it for you. And if you don't speak up about the work that you're doing and like make that your differentiating factor, sometimes it'll just get forgotten. And I think it also goes a long way towards building relationships. Like if you worked on a big feature release and you talk about it and you call out and thank the people that worked on it with you, then they're going to remember that too. Someone recently said to me, like, if you aren't spending your one-on-ones with like your manager just talking about all of the good work you've done, then you're doing it wrong. And that really stuck with me, because I often come into those like, I don't know, I don't really have any problems right now, but I should really be like talking about the things that went well, or like things that I went out of my way to do, just to make sure those aren't getting unrecognized.
Woohoo.
Yeah, for real. And one of the best ways I feel like to, and this is another kind of like scaling factor, but how have you invested in other people, and how have you, you know, invested those skills and learnings and other things in order to enable other people? The gift of enabling others not only expands your grouping, but also what you can get done. Because if you don't physically have to do it and there's someone else who can, it means that you have the ability to share the load. Not always, but sometimes. And differentiation, right, is, and this is I loved celebrating every single thing about what you bring to a position. And I feel like, especially from that leadership standpoint, maybe not directly at the staff level, but maybe one above that, it's how you bring out the differentiation and skills of others within your organizations to bring completeness, right? There's something to be said. Angela called it glue, but I think it's more than glue. I think it can be lubrication, so to speak, too, right? Keep things moving, keep people happy, right? That got a little weird. I apologize, but I'm thinking of Maria and manufacturing right now, so I'm sorry. But you know, there's something to be said about, have you ever moved a gear or tried to turn over a motor or something else like that, and it's dry? There's no gas in the tank. There's no lubricant anywhere. To get the lubricant to where it needs to be in order to start that engine going again, it's not just about putting in the fuel. Yeah, you need fuel in order to make it go. But if you put fuel in a dry engine, what happens? You blow up the engine, right? So add a little bit of grease, add a little bit of, you know, silicone lubrication, synthetic lube, whatever, oils. And all of a sudden, those permeate all those little surfaces and make it so if it's doing its job right, you barely notice that it's there, right? Unless you're really scraping the walls, are you going to notice how much oil's in between every piston? But without it, the engine blows up. And I feel like that's kind of a good analogy here, because the fuel might be the amount of people you're throwing at the problem, or the amount of money that's coming in order to get that engine going. But unless you have you know, kind of those staff engineers making sure that every surface is, you know, good to go, that's how you get the engine going. That got a little strange. My analogy went a little off the rails.
I loved it though. And it reminds me of a story. So, you know, I came into an employee here, you know, kind of new to the group. So I'm learning everybody. They're also learning me. And I always find that I just have to wait it out. it always comes. It's not, but there's a delay reaction. They need longer to warm up to me. And in this initial stage, a conflict happened with another team member and the leader of the team member. And because, I was experienced at the time, and I wasn't going to back down and just sit and take it. Like, that was not at that point in my career, right? So I was ready to go to blows. But with the new manager, he called a pause, and he just kind of asked me to basically go to my corner. Let's go to my corner. And I can remember the look on his face, because I said this to him. I said, okay, that's fine for my project, but I am not going to let this young guy on our team fail at his project. I'm not going to do it. And I remember the look in his face, and it was just sincere. It was in the moment, but it spoke to him on a level that catapulted me into the future. It gave me a lot of space to be able to go to my corner then. I didn't have to necessarily fight to prove myself in the moment, because, I won a big one in his favor. And then I took the slow road and the indirect road, right? So I'm no longer dealing with this guy. I'm in my corner, but I'm pumping up this young kid, right? And I'm just feeding him all the good stuff. And I'm just going, full out for success. And it was interesting in that by making him successful, it made me successful, even though I had nothing to do with that project. So it was an interesting story, and I don't even know now if it relates to, but it's never, it's not always, direct. It's not always obvious, but do what you feel is right.
Yeah, I love that example of kind of like up leveling the folks around you, and very much like that shows that supports you, it supports the company, helps you build impact for the company, and people do really recognize it. So yeah, definitely plus one, like take the opportunity to bring those up around you. Specifically, the things that I like to do to really kind of like add grease to the wheels of the organization is to oftentimes recognize that we're all humans, right? And sometimes there's challenges going on. Companies have big reorgs. The tech world's having lots of layoffs, right? Like all of this is going on, and it impacts the team around you, and their ability to be able to be their best self at work. And so I do try to watch quite closely in meetings, and it's all Zoom. Dropbox is a fully virtual company. But look for body language or word choice changes, things along those lines that might indicate that that person needs a little bit something extra right then. And I'll take the time to set up like a one-on-one with them. I love it, Stacy. Yes. Read the room or read the Zoom. I couldn't see the cross that part. Yeah, I love it. And give them that space to talk. And I find a lot of times as like the staff engineer, the principal engineer, you're seen as a safe space. You're not part of the management chain, but you have visibility into a lot of the organizational things, politics, what have you, that are going on. And so you could often be that resource for those individuals and help them, come back to center. The other thing I love to do is to keep a lookout for people's strengths and in their preferred communication styles. So, if I'm in a meeting and, I know there's somebody who's like had this really cool idea, and I really want that to be broadcasted, like want whomever in the room, the VP or director or whatever in the room, to hear that great idea, call out that person and say like, oh, this is so-and-so's idea, and this is why this is valuable to the company. And I try to do that always, but especially if they're in the room, because I want them to to get that little boost of confidence that comes with that. On the flip side, I do try to like look out for people's weaknesses as well, or the areas of improvement, and coach them as best I can, either through like setting example, or if I have a good enough relationship with them, you know, like share some of those thoughts. And if it's, you know, something that's really holding them back, you know, talking with their manager, not in an all like so-and-so is like, you know, not doing a good job sort of way, but you know, like I really think if this person can improve their communication skills, it'll really allow them to be more impactful and be able to share their brilliance with the organization better, and really, really support them that way and help with that up leveling as well for them.
That's kind of amazing. I think that those are some of the best conversations. Especially if you have a manager who's really being attentive, right? I feel like, especially from the staff plus standpoint, the first points in every conversation is, hey, how do we get so-and-so promoted next? Here's some of the skill gaps that I've been noticing with this, and this. And maybe that's, and then you get to talk about all the great work you're doing, but it's that kind of, hey, I've noticed that, you know, so-and-so has been just super technically adept, but they really need to kind of be pushed in this one skill in order to be ready for that next level, and or whatever, and have those conversations in a way that's growth oriented and growth focused with management, and with and it's a partnership. It's very different from the usual manager, because you're usually working with a manager, not under a manager.
Mm-hmm.
It's like you know, staff plus, at least I would say from the plus standpoint, maybe not at the staff level, but if you're not reporting to a director or VP, it feels a little off. Maybe just as a kind of thing, or equivalent, right? So kind of with that, we've had some questions from Meredith about what is it like to be a woman in a staff engineer role. Are women often in this role these days? Are there roles and jobs you feel like women get pushed towards that you've had to resist in order and get clarity around your own positions? And I'll kind of like throw this in. It's like the vast majority of organizations I've been at, I've been the highest level technical woman there. I might have a couple of compatriots. That's the other thing that's changed. That's the only thing that's changed in the last couple of jobs, is there is somebody else. Like, maybe not, definitely not in my org, but there is, I am not alone. So and we'll say, like, you know, the percentages have, even a very female and diversity focused organizations, the numbers have not been great. But what is it like for you as a woman in a staff engineer role? Do you see other women in these roles these days? You know, what was it like even when you were, you know, especially for Maria and Angela, and I know to a certain degree with you, Jordan, as well, but like, you know, what do you see around you?
Yeah, well, definitely back in the day, you know, little to none. But, and then I think we did kind of go through an interesting dip. And in true women fashion, I think it was more like a shift in a rally, you know, and now it's coming back, and I'll say in full force. So there are companies with initiatives to target women into leadership positions, because I think they're starting to understand the benefits. You know, so they'll actively be seeking women for leadership positions. Yeah, so I've definitely seen that. That is a great, somehow I would challenge that, you know, if you're looking for a job, either to seek out companies either that might want to that talk about that as a goal, right? That support that in some way, because not all do, and when you do have that kind of support, it makes a huge difference. It absolutely makes a huge difference. So I have seen in those leadership roles in those companies that they will not tolerate certain amount of behavior from more traditional and old guarded, we'll say good old boys clubs. Yeah, they definitely have the pulse on the finger. So it's not just getting women into those roles, but it's supporting the behavior that also supports that.
Yeah, my answer's pretty quick, which is like, it's not great, but I feel like it's gotten better. And to the second part of your question, Meredith, I think like one thing that I've noticed with women who are getting like more senior into staff engineering roles is maybe a bias towards thinking of them as untechnical or like holding them to a higher standard than men would be for the same role. And like, it's easier to dismiss the other side of that where maybe like they're really good at cross collaboration or project management and planning and breaking things down into smaller pieces. And so I think that's the biggest thing that I've had to fight against as I've moved into more senior roles.
Yeah, I mean, I'll mention, I'm the first woman principal engineer at Dropbox. So like gives you like a, oh, thank you. But now we have a second, she's in security. Which is really exciting. And I would say the same thing, I'm really seeing the industry kind of rebound. When I started in 1999, there were a lot of women in computer science programs and things like that. And it wasn't super unusual to work with other women. When I was at Scottrade, my VP of engineering was actually a woman. She was a grandmother of 2 daughters with granddaughters. She was amazing, so supportive, and very much that sponsor and just inspiration for me, I would say. I do want to touch on, like the importance of finding sponsors in your organization and when you're looking at new organizations, ask about sponsorship, to what like Maria was talking about. That goes a long way. Mentorship is awesome. Getting coaching is awesome because that helps you grow as an individual, but that sponsor can often be that person that's looking out for opportunities for you that you may not be privy to otherwise. And that's something, I know I take very seriously now in my role, and I appreciate those who've looked out for me previously as well to help me grow in my career. And I'm sure that will continue this like give and take as my career continues to progress. The other part of the question that I thought was interesting is, women get pushed into other roles. And I would say the one that I notice a lot for the women who could very well be staff engineers, principal engineers, or very, strong technical engineers, is they're also great collaborators and they have high empathy and things along those lines. So oftentimes they can also be plugged for engineering manager roles, which they would also be awesome at because these are incredible women. But I would say that's oftentimes what I see is kind of this, like, do I become an engineering manager? Do I stay on the IC track? And that's always a personal decision. I have 2 mentees right now that are on that cusp. They're 1 level below staff engineer, and they're like, okay, now what? And it's not an answer that anyone else can, like, you can't give anyone else that answer, right? Like, there's a lot of things to consider about whether or not I'm going to be a manager or stay on the IC track. But that would be the one where, if you're getting to that point in your career and you're hearing people say like, hey, there's a manager position open, like really, really consider it. Consider that, or consider whether you want to stay on the IC track. I'll also mention that at least my colleagues at Dropbox, including myself, have flip-flopped over the years. And I think that flip-flop actually really helps grow your career because you understand both perspectives, and you can be such a stronger partner to the managers you work with. And it also gives you some of those additional kind of technical leadership skills that come with, working with lots of different individuals and what's going on in their world.
Well, thank everyone so much for their time tonight. I'd love to just get a little bit of your information. What are you doing next? Where are you going? And Brock, my son needs to sit down to the side. Monkey see, monkey do, right?
Motherhood. Yeah.
Yeah.
Our most
On that
important
note,
goal.
that is why I have to go, because it's bedtime. So that's where I'm going. But it was great talking to everybody. Thank you so much for having me. Nice to meet everybody.
Nice to meet you.
Thank you all. This was great.
Yeah, this has been so awesome.
Great conversation. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having us. This was terrific.
What are you
So,
doing?
well, I guess like we'll answer your question before we sign off, Stacy. Like, what's next for us? For me, I don't have any plans to leave Dropbox. I've only been in this role for about a year at this point. This kind of technical leadership role for a larger organization, and so much opportunity for growth and learning still ahead of me, and every day is interesting and new. So can just continue doubling down in that role and continue to try to like grow my skill set there to be as effective as I can be. And yeah, personal life, I just keep clicking along. Like I've got a kid going into high school. I should just still wrapping my head around that one.
Hey, you know, I'll probably be with you in about 10 years, so it's okay.
I got my sights set on retirement. I'm starting to feel my age. Even though my energy is not as much as it used to be, I do feel my wisdom is compensating. So definitely want to have heavy impact. Not done with the game yet, but starting to coast down.
It's so interesting because I'm just going like, all right, what are the skills I need to collect like Pokemon in order to get to CTO? Like that's my end game, right? And I'm like going, all right, on the regular skills chart, I need to get the managing of managers as my day-to-day at some point. But it's also like, oh, but then I have to like give up a certain amount of. There is a great amount of freedom in this position. I feel like that, and well, I know, not feel like, I know, I've been the manager. Like it's different, but I've also enjoyed it at a lot of cases. So it's, when Angela talks about being able to have that perspective, it's really, it enables you to take everything to that very next level and burgeons in on what I call mind reading. You know the problems that need to be solved before they come up. You know, oh, I bet this connected this, and I heard about this, and I put all that together, and I bet in 2 or 3 months they're going to ask me this question, so I'm just going to do a little bit of research and be ready for when that ask comes, right? And then you look like a mind reader, right? But all you've done is what is essentially your job. It's projection and analysis, right? So yes, apparently he agrees.
Oh
Well,
yeah,
like-
yes, definitely. Go ahead, Melissa.
Oh, I was just gonna say I was thanking all our wonderful panelists tonight and Stacy, and I dropped everyone's connection links in the chat if anyone would like to connect. And I'm just gonna stop recording now.